that you may have, and my guests in studio will be filling in on those questions and giving their input as well. So let me introduce them very quickly. On my farthest right, I'm joined by Victor Sankara, who's the chairperson of Ford Kenya Kasarani branch. Thank you very much, Sankara, for your time this morning.
Thank you for having me.
All right, next to him is Muito Mureithi, who's a political analyst and a commentator as well. Asante sana, Muito, good to have you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone.
Good morning. And on my immediate right, I'm joined by George Ngaira, who's a governance analyst. Thank you very much, Ngaira, for your time this morning.
Thank you for having me, Cynthia.
All right, welcome, gentlemen. Now, if you look at the headlines this morning, talks about the PS's reshuffle, and the Daily Nation specifically puts it as Raila's big harvest. This comes 2 weeks after the two leaders signed a pact. Is it a handshake? Is it not? Is it a coalition? Is it not? Some of those questions really have been on the rise for the past 2 weeks. But Sankara, I'll begin with you. Was this to be expected, considering that, you know, they've come together? Odinga says he's lending experts to the government, and so big harvest, about 14 principal secretary positions for the ODM leader. Was this to be expected?
Well, this was actually expected, especially after the former premier lost out in the AUC elections. He came back to Kenya, and now the political realignments are actually happening in real time. Because just the other week we saw him signing a pact which they called it a memorandum of understanding, but it's actually a political pact between the two of them on how they are going to share power in Kenya. And now, as we see, the former premier had already given out his experts in the cabinet, and now this PSS is just showing that the pact is getting more entrenched into the political sphere, because even these PSS, as you can see, most of them are allies of the former prime minister, and what he's doing is just assuaging to his traditional bases, because as you can see, he has put there people from the regions which have traditionally been supportive of his political career. We see him putting there people from Western region, from the Maa Nation, and also from the coastal regions. So this one, we should look at it as a ploy for 2027, because these people who he has placed in those positions are the ones whom he will be depending on come 2027 to support President Ruto.
Right. Muito, I'll come to you now. As an analyst, if you look at what the last 2 weeks have been and the kind of reception these leaders have gotten from the popular, the popular people at large, or the Kenyan people at large, and political leaders, how has it been like for the last 2 weeks? Has this pact yielded the results that it was meant to, at least within the last 2 weeks?
Well, like they always say, same monkeys in different forests. So, for the former prime minister, is not really Bonadawa for the transformation that the economic transformation, the development that we would have expected, it would not necessarily come from the former prime minister, having at some point held a very lofty position, the head of government as the prime minister.
Right.
And we didn't see much. We were able to witness the maize scandal that ended up in his desk because it reached his PA, got into him, and that's the point. That story was killed. The youth fund for Kazi kwa Vijana, while he was the PM, and many other things that happened. Lack of compensation for the people who get maimed and die for him to get whatever position, because you see, like 2007, there had to be some bloodshed for him to rise to that position. 2017, there had to be some bloodshed for him to rise to that position. 2022, there had to be some bloodshed for him to rise to that position. And I have never had this issue of compensation or even acknowledging the effort as a communal effort, but it ends up as the man of the day. Yet, there are some young men, young women who lose lives as a result of being marshaled to go to the streets and face armed fellows who are in our armed forces, the police and the like security agents. Now, that does not really take center stage with him. Because anytime, if you want to see how grateful I was, is if I acknowledge how far we've come together. Mm-hmm. That's not an element with Raila Odinga. So we know that he's selfish, and whatever he has come up with is out of selfish interest. And had the blunder not occurred on the side of the current president, His Excellency Dr. William Ruto, of impeaching his own deputy and impeaching 4.7 million votes, he wouldn't have had the need to feel that there is need to come into a coalition so soon. When
you say 4.7 million, do you mean the Mount Kenya?
I mean the Mount Kenya vote within and diaspora. Now, what I mean is that hit, the president feels it. Amid now the current decision, the verdict by the court, that ODM is the majority, the UDA camp is left with no grounds, because you will witness that the number of votes that MPs that they were able to vote in, I think they were around 150 something, minus 44 that rejected the issues of the government and gone full blown into politics against the government. It means that's not the president's support. So if you deduct the 44 and the many others who actually were sidelined by Raila Odinga, who came in through the Jubilee ticket, because it's now an ODM affair, it means Raila Odinga is walking in without the strength people imagine that Raila Odinga has. One, he does not have the full support of the Kamba MPs. He does not have the full support of the Jubilee MPs. So when you deduct these numbers, you know that he has taken a very, very exiguous support to President William Ruto, and he knows it. And the president also knows that he's walking in with crutches in this.
So it's a huge gamble.
It's a gamble for them. Mm-hmm. They know too well that there is also another gap that was created last year, that has actually created another monster called the Gen Z. The Gen Z, unless they're denied IDs, because that would be the strategy, yes, this is where it is. So it's going to bite them in the course of time. One, I wanted to just say that this marriage is a marriage of convenience. Raila Odinga had just experienced a big loss after withdrawing from the race at the AU. I wish he had gone all the way. Then coming back to this place, he had to find a fallback. The unfortunate bit the area that was opened was the government side, because the opposition side would not have allowed him to come again and oust maybe the likes of Kalonzo Musyoka, who have declared their presidency, the likes of Eugene Wamalwa, the likes of others who are going to come up, Fred Matiang'i and the rest who are coming up as presidential candidates. This Bungoma senator also is among them. So what we are saying is that he knows that there is no space, there is no room. So he's also playing that, he's using those aces that he has. Now, being in that government, one, they have nothing to lose. So to him, whether the government fails or succeeds, at least they'll have had an opportunity to amass and gather enough for their campaigns for 2027. Once Raila Odinga declares that he's still young at heart to go for the presidency.
Okay, we've mentioned a key factor as well, and that is on the Gen Zs, and we'll be coming to that. But Ngaira, I'll come to you as a governance analyst. You know, with the new PSs coming in, essentially the wage bill balloons. We already have a bloated public service, and you know it's one of the key issues. If you remember, post the Gen Z demonstrations last year in August, as CSs were being sent home, and there was a lot of cutbacks on financial expenditure to various offices. But we seem to be back to square one as we speak. And so this particular pact or MOU, how does it serve the common people, especially the taxpayers?
It's very unfortunate, Sister Cynthia, because the only people benefiting from this pact are the politicians who are getting in new offices, and not the taxpayers that have to spend on 7 more state departments, which then have to have what you call a national rollout, because they're national state departments. And sometimes they might not go to the sub-counties, but at the very least they need county structures. And you can imagine what it means to the taxpayers, especially on functions which have already been devolved. Cynthia, Kenyans were not stupid in 2010 when they made a decision to create devolution. They did so because they understood that we no longer need an era of the big government that we used to have before, where majority of the basic functions, particularly those ones pertaining to food, health, education, to some extent, and a few other functions that had already been taken to the counties, and therefore we did not need to have a very bloated government to be able to run. They wanted the government to be very efficient, and they voted with anger. That was the easiest vote that I did. You know, I lived next to my polling station there.
Yeah.
I was living in Parklands, and I voted at Hospital Hill. So literally, I jumped off my bed and just voted and went back to bed. It was the easiest vote because I knew what was at stake. We were coming off the 2007 election where the biggest issue was equity, and therefore when somebody said that we are going to make it a mandatory that every Kenyan must be served with or without his political opinion, that for me was the biggest reason as to why I woke up to go do that. But the benefit of that was going to be the efficiency with which government was expected to operate within the context of devolution, and that was supposed to cut costs. Now when you add 7 state departments, you take us to 58. That is almost 60 state departments, because you also have some amorphous agencies that operate within the office of the president that pretty much operate as a department. You had the president's economic unit having a budget of, I don't know, 2 billion, 3 billion shillings. That is more or less what some state departments receive for their annual budget. And you can imagine that is just going to an economic council within the presidency. You understand? Complete wastage of public funds, and so there is no way this decision can benefit Kenyans. It can't, however way you look at it, it only benefits the politicians, and which is very unfortunate.
Right. And so, you know, putting in these positions with the perspective of the wage bill and the bloated government and what the taxpayers really are calling for, and that is accountability, as well as just say less spending in government. As you've said, you know, it is creation of positions not to serve the people, but to serve the government. And so does this mean really that the government listens or not?
This must be the most hardcore president, one of those presidents that completely disregards the wishes of the people. Never mind, he's the most threatened. You know, no other president has faced what he faced last year. There's no president who sat and watched on live TV as his parliament is being banned. This was the most threatened president, and he ought to have taken the biggest lesson more than any other president, to be able to understand that what it's at stake is actually a civil threat to his presidency, and not necessarily a military coup. It would have been a civilian coup had the people succeeded to stay on the streets and send him away, because no single KDF or military officer was on the streets trying to kick him out. But the president seems to not have learned. You know, that's what happens in human beings, Cynthia, because we grow up in different places and we are cultured differently. There are people, however much you correct them, they never change. You know, like in school when they used to write noisemakers, there's some characters you'd always expect this one will be on the list anytime. And he's a repeat offender. There are people that commit mistakes right at the prison doors. He's just left incarceration and he starts by insulting the officer and he's taken back for another offense. I think this president belongs to that category of people. And I think until Kenyans teach him a lesson, it's only, and based on what we have now that we have a dead parliament that cannot hold this government to account, I think it's only the people who can hold this president to account, because when one day, when you hear, Cynthia, countries or governments have collapsed, most times it's because the people are tired with the system. Most times when you hear that, you know, in such a country, people have risen up and they've thrown out a president, it's not because they enjoy throwing out presidents and having a failed state. Nobody wishes for a failed state. If you look at what is happening in the Eastern Congo, it's very unfortunate, Cynthia. We're now going to tens of thousands of people being killed on a daily basis. I do not think there's anybody who can wish such a thing to his country. It happens when systems fail and you're not able to really have institutions that are working, that are able to hold the leaders into account, because William Ruto is just a president for a season. You know, at some point he has to leave. And with that, then he has to understand that the decisions he makes are not just personal decisions, but the decisions that actually affect Kenyans in the many years to come. Because Kenyans at stake today want to eat, go to have a good housing, be healthy, go to school, and at least have a decent job to do. If those 5 things are not happening, then you're living at risk.
Right. Sankara, if you look at the road ahead, really, one of the key factors that will be in place on the mind of a voter will be on matters economy, and especially on, are they able to afford, you know, food on their tables? Are they able to pay education for their kids? Are they able to get health services when they walk to hospitals? Does this pact really prove that that is something that the government will be able to achieve within the next about 2 years ahead of 2027? And how much will that be of a factor as well for on whether or not Ruto gets a second term or not?
Well, you see, let's start from the beginning where the rain started beating us, because Raila Odinga and William Ruto did not just find themselves in a pact. There were some push factors that led to this. The first, the key amongst them was the Gen Z uprising. And the Gen Z did not rise just because they wanted their people to be put in government or someone whom they know to be appointed as a PS. They rose in anger because of the economy. They felt that the economy was really being hard on them. And on the finance bill, it was being pushed more taxes to make life even more unbearable for them.
Right.
And that's what made them spill into the streets and even storm parliament. So that's what shook William Ruto, and so he saw that for me to survive this, I need to manage the politics, and that's what he's trying to do. Because as at now, he thinks that once he manages the politics, every other thing will buy him time so that he can sort the real issues. But now the problem which we need to ask ourselves, and even the president needs to be very keen on it, are these people whom I have put in government, will they actually help me to solve the key issue which made the people rise against me? Because even these Gen Zs and William Ruto, their conflict was not about positions. It was about the economy and how the country was being run. They want to see health care, they want to see the education, they want to see the state of the economy being at least better for the people. But as for Ruto's perspective, he sees that what he needs to do is to at least bring the temperatures down. And that's why he brought in Raila, to help him manage the situation. By June 25th, it was obvious that the people were about to topple Ruto from power. So he had two options: to either co-opt Raila and stabilize the country by bringing the temperatures down, or stay put and then hand the government to the military. So he chose the option of co-opting Raila, because Raila, as we can see, he has helped him bring the temperatures down. Though the fire is still not extinguished, but at least the temperatures are down. But now the question that we need to ask, for how long will this political posturing help him? Because even in the coming days, there is coming to be the finance bill again. Will the people again reject it, or they will now accept it? That's another question which he needs to ask himself. And again, even as he's managing the politics, his eyes are on 2027. As my friend put it, he lost a very big chunk of his votes by impeaching his deputy president, Rigathi Gachagua. So he's also looking at how can he manage
to get the numbers back.
To replace the numbers. And that's where Raila comes in. Because even in as much as we are accusing Raila of being opportunistic, of being greedy or everything else, but we must give it to him. He has his loyal supporters.
But I'll go with the 4.7 million that Muito was able to put here. Yeah. Where does Odinga get 4.7 more million votes?
Okay, but you know Raila Odinga had 6.9 million votes in 2022.
What about the Mount Kenya region? Because this is just Mount Kenya.
Okay, but Raila did not get more votes in Mount Kenya. It was William Ruto, and this is now how he wants to replace the votes by having Raila, because when he has Raila, he'll be assured that he can get some votes from Western, from Nyanza, and from the coastal region. Whether these numbers will match the Mount Kenya votes is subject to debate. But at least by bringing Raila, we see that, you know Kenyans are still blinded by the Mtuetu syndrome. That's why when you saw Joho being appointed, you saw people in Mombasa celebrating. When Oparanya was appointed, people in Kakamega celebrated. Whether this will help him in the long run or is just a short-term relief, it's something that will need time to be to come to full circle.
Right.
But as at now, at least he's trying to manage the situation.
All right, we'll come back to the game of numbers. But Mwito, on the economy still, because there's still issues with the Social Health Authority, that is SHA. We've got questions on their housing levy. We've got questions on the university funding model. These are touching on key basic needs of a human, education. You've got, health. And so how does the Ruto-Raila, I'd call it government, broad-based government, how do they overturn the feelings and the sentiments of the common people and the fact that these are some of the issues that are not functioning to their favor to make them function?
First of all is that if I invite a stranger to run my family, the desires I have for my kids, he can't really meet them. He won't even hug it. How to handle my wife, that stranger can't help. So ODM never believed in anything to do with what Kenya Kwanza believed in. And then when you entrust a stranger now to take charge, it means one of you has lost it. And in this case, I believe the government side, which is the Kenya Kwanza side, the UDA side, we should have gotten back to the drawing board and thought of how they would have made better their promises, because when they were making their promises during the campaigns, they were very clear on how this is going to work and how they would get to arrive to that point. And to a certain level, they almost got it right. But I think some way, somehow, I think things got too much on, especially the president, that monitoring what is happening in these lower departments was until he sees the smoke, then he moves in. And this is what has happened with SHA. SHA was meant to be, a transformation of NHIF, not into SHA, because initially during campaigns it was not transforming it into SHA. The Adani thing came later. It was to improve on NHIF. It was to be made a very perfect social health care with the universal health care, whatever strategy and plan and policies that were to run that whole health sector. Now, when they dropped it and the Adani thing came about, that's when some members of the government who felt disgruntled that we're now swaying away from our original initial stance. And that's where the friction began in government. And it ended up somewhere. Now, SHA was not meant to succeed when the entry of Adani and the interest of Adani and the people of, the local investors, and I'm talking about local investors because the local investors were found to be in government, because we could hear during there was an exposition that Apeiro has got some Kenyan, investors in it, and they are somewhere up there on the hill. You could hear Convergence as a main character, and you could hear a certain CS then. I think they had mentioned the Duale of Defense. I can mention because it was there on paper that he's part of the shareholders of the Convergence. There was Safaricom. This is an entity, government entity, which is not wrong because Safaricom, you see, it has a reach to almost every Kenyan. So if they were to use this as a platform, then definitely there would not be much of a problem. But you see, considering the amount of money that was set aside in our budget, 104 billion that was set aside and released for that purpose into failure, sometimes it seems as though it was deliberate, or to the levels of corruption that we have in Kenya and the smartness of the minds of the people of Kenya who have that corrupt instinct. You can introduce something and knowing too well that it will fail at that point, but let's have this money leave. So these are the kind of things. SHA was the worst idea because like the president once put it, even the constitution that we do, we decided to do an overhaul. There were very good things that we decided to remove and replace with others that we are now dealing with, and we shall deal with others which are even more serious, that touch on various economic ideals and also social ideals that were actually set aside, that actually sound sort of tend to seem to be, contravening the same laws that have been set in the Constitution. If you allow me to give an example, the day you shall set a threshold of the so-called marginalized communities and the big budget that you give them, and you begin to think on how you can tame it, like the way we wanted to introduce, the people wanted to introduce, from other regions, wanted to introduce the 1 man, 1 shilling, 1 vote. Yeah. Instead of 1 man, 1 shilling, 1 kilometer. You know, a kilometer, I mean, is just an area. It doesn't have interest. But that is what has been running the economy for the longest time. The day we shall attempt to really do a real change on these things, then definitely kutawaka moto. And we dealt with it during when we were making the constitution. And we made certain laws that say that a county can legislate based on even the majority or the people, the inhabitants of that county. So when you begin to touch an area which has chosen to gang itself as a religious community, when you thought it was meant to be a cultural community, when it becomes a religious community and a majority is in control of a certain county, then other people from other religions within the same county begin to suffer. And we witnessed some such things in the areas like Northeastern, the so-called Northeastern region. So what I'm trying to say is that the day you shall say that from now henceforth we are not giving you the 3 billion extra or 4 billion extra beyond what we give other counties, for marginalization, the equalization fund, how do you bring equality when you're denying others? They pay the taxes, they don't get anything in return, and then it's given to one who is not collecting any taxes locally and remitting in anything meaningful to the public coffers, the treasury. And eventually that person seems to be the beneficiaries. It has become now a strategy that we will not develop our area. We will sponsor our students to go and study where there are schools already, so we won't build schools here. So there is no way they will ever hit the threshold, even if you set, unless a rule is set and people are able to get to that point. You go to the courts, I won't get to that one. Go to the Muslims, they have the Qadi's court. It takes them away from all social issues unless they decide to take it to the other side of the secular law in the High Court. So these are the kind of things I'm saying. These are monsters that we will face at some point because we ignored the voices that spoke about the Abuja Declaration, who didn't know that this is how it's going to be. Now, if you look at the Kenyan map, definitely you can say about 9 counties are religious, are actually united under religious connotations. So what I'm trying to say is that the things that we are discussing right now, getting back now to where we were, that the mess that we're experiencing is, some of them are as a result of what we did with the Constitution a long time ago. When we come back now to the SHA thing, I had just tried to explain on the economic challenges that we are expecting to face based on what we already have on the table. The economic challenge brought about in this, through the sector of health, you know, the SHA thing, and the education. Now, capturing those two, the banding method was the worst. The criteria used to qualify a student to get whatever amount of loan was, I said it was sort of, I don't want to use a bad word, I just want to say it lacked wisdom. Because times change, circumstances change in life, unless they don't know that. Because somebody will ask you where you schooled in primary school, and they hear, okay, you are in a group of schools today, your parents cannot afford that, even cannot afford to put a meal on the table, you know. And then all of a sudden, that person judges by that one and says, you guys, I think you have come from group of academies, group of schools, you are somebody who is supposed to get a certain percentage, less than anybody else. Yet, you're the one who deserves it more today. So we had this argument long before they even made it into law, because the sycophantic parliament that we have today is a yes parliament, passed the laws that allowed SHA to come into existence or even to be discussed, because it's running, you know?
Yes.
And it must have been legislated by parliament without thinking and killing the child that was there, the NHIF, instead of empowering or renewing the policies of NHIF and also putting in more money to have a better NHIF. If this model, university model, was supposed to be empowered, they would have just added money. Give them more money, enough to sustain themselves while in school and also in their livelihoods whilst they are still studying. And make it easier once they come out. If we get waivers on land, simply because some politicians know that they own some land and they would deserve some waivers from paying taxes on those ones, you know, in terms of exemptions from paying for those land rates. Why not have such exemptions for the students, a certain waiver for the students once they complete, that you will not pay 100%, you shall pay 30%. Expected of you to pay in a period of 10 years. That would have been easier, but you've already given them enough to keep them in school, because the amount of taxes they will pay as soon as they get employed, they will make more for the government. Now, the SHA and the banding thing is something that were not well thought of, or the people who sat down to discuss this were real strangers to these realities. So that's why it's biting the president. If you allow me again to just clarify as I hand over, the friend of mine who is a Gen Z today, a youth today, we were youths once upon a time. We always say in our community that the circumciser was once a sucker uncircumcised. So when you talk about when you were uncircumcised, we were also uncircumcised at some point. We were young men. And the freedom you're having right now for multi-party politics, it is us who suffered the brunt. That is in the 90s and late 80s and coming into the mid-90s, we suffered it. And that's how come the repeal of Section 2A came about. It is the force and the effort of the youth put into correct use. You know, not unlike what we are seeing right now after maybe a motorcade leaves and then the youth are used, you know, to vandalize. I mean, to rob the people who had actually attended whatever function, or even terrorize people around there. This is not. That's not how we're supposed to marshal our efforts. What they did last year. The group of Gen Zs that came out, at some point they got doubts that I don't think these are guys from our team. And I can tell you, that Sunday for the Gen Zs on the second week that they were to have their event, that weekend, there was mobilization from certain political party. And there were some youth who were sent to the ground, and they started mobilizing on Sunday evening. They did it on Monday. On Tuesday, they got their second pay and they left.
Where do these allegations come from, Ruto?
They're not allegations.
How can you substantiate?
I was with them. I had them. I was with them. I walked with them that night. So what I'm trying to say is, this is how it was. Now, when these guys were marshaled, they are the ones who you saw the Gen Zs doubting. So you can pick that clip. They knew these are strangers. I'm just bringing you up to speed with what happened.
Right.
But the reality is that sometimes if I want you to allow me to give you a solution on how to quell this fire, I might pour fuel while you're pouring water, you know? Then we shall discuss on how to reconstruct this building that we have burnt down. But from my side, I was using petrol while you're using water to quench this thing.
All right,
and
we'll come back to the Gen Z factor. We'll come back to the Gen Z issue, because it's also a key factor ahead of 2027. But Gaira, if you come back to now, another factor as well that Ruto-Raila may have to contend with is the new opposition that is taking shape, and this includes former Deputy President Rigathi Gachagua, Martha Karua, Kalonzo Musyoka, talk about Eugene Wamalwa, and many more that may decide to join this, bandwagon led by Gachagua and Karua and Kalonzo. How does Ruto-Raila contend with this? How do they contend with this? Putting in mind that Gachagua, quite verbally put it out in public that his main goal is to ensure that Ruto goes home in 2027. How can he do that?
By numbers, by mobilizing numbers to the ballot. That's how presidents are elected. So if there's to be a new president, then he has to get a lot of votes, isn't it? But very quickly, let me address something that my brother Sankara mentioned about Raila Odinga. Raila Odinga got 6.9 million votes, out of the 6.9 million, 1 million votes came from Central Kenya, which are now gone. So that's 5.9. You also got 2 million votes from the Lower Eastern region, which was Ukambani. And then so you take out 2 million votes, we are at 3.9. And then you come to the Western region, which almost half of it is now drifting towards something else. And that was about 2.5 million. When you take out 1.9 million, then it remains with 2 million. Then the 2 million votes is what then he collected a little bit from the coast, and a bit from the coast, and the other one that he got maybe in the Masai areas, Rift Valley and Samburu, in those particular areas, which is almost 500,000, which is 50-50, because those are minorities that go with the way the mood goes. He only remains with 1.5 million votes. And that 1.5 million votes largely belongs to what you call the Nyanza region, where Matiang'i just the other day has hinted he wants to go for presidency. And for the first time, I was at, randomly, I was with a friend in town, and then he told me we go to a certain meeting at Serena. Then I bumped into a function that was there for purported Gusii and Kuria leaders, the one that Osoro was speaking. I ran into that event. It was just a private event that I think they were meeting. And I think, and in that event was the very first time I had people branding themselves, the way you hear Mount Kenya leaders and Western leaders. I had people saying the Kisii and Kuria leaders. We had never had that combination of Kisii and Kuria. But see, Kisii and Kuria is what forms South Nyanza. You understand? And Kurias were the first ones to leave in 2017, and they voted Jubilee, both Kuria East and Kuria West. They even repeated that in this 2022 election, who actually elected UDA, because of the local politics between the Luo community and the Kurias and the governorship of the county. So they fell out, and those guys walked out of that relationship. So now when you top that up, we top that up with the Kisii region, which is Nyamira and Kisii. Again, we're talking about 600,000 votes gone. It leaves Raila Odinga with only 1 million votes that he can go into the ballot with. You can imagine, if you were to ask how much Raila Odinga delivers now to William Ruto, then it's less than 1 million votes, yes, which is quite unsubstantial. But you see, in politics, there's something called bragging rights. You see, if you're an MCA, Cynthia, or a woman rep, you have until the midnight of that election day to brag as the custodian of that electoral unit. Yeah. You understand? But shortly after you lose the seat by midnight, somebody else becomes either an MC or an MP, and he takes that mandate and you become a nobody, and become just like President Uhuru Kenyatta the other day when he was standing next to his son's gate, saying they want to you remember it was live on NTV, and that is a former head of state, literally like a small MCA running to save his son's life, because by his stature he ought to have other people to do that kind of small work of containing some purported they say that there's some government operatives that were trying to get into his son's residency, and actually the Minister of Interior gave a response that they were suspecting something and it's part of their duty to do it. You understand? That was a head of state. So there's a mandate that collapses shortly after that. So Raila Odinga has between today and the 10th of August midnight to enjoy the bragging rights of being, the leader of opposition and the kind of stature that ODM is enjoying. But I'm telling you, Cynthia, with the mountain that he got, bit of the mountain that he got 1 million out, and the 2 million from the east, that's 3 million votes. You cut out another 1.5 million votes from Western region, including myself, a former life member of ODM. I have since moved on with my life. A former life member of ODM. Yeah. I have since moved on with my life. And we are about 1 million of us, Sankara. You understand? That's another 1 million. That's already 4 million votes, isn't it? So when you walk into that coalition, then you begin to ask, what are you bringing on the table? I leave it for everybody to see what Raila Odinga will believe in. I think as ODM, and I've been a member of ODM for the last 20 years, is that we had our best election was the 2007 election, where we had almost 100 members of parliament, which is almost 50% of parliament. But then 2013, our numbers went low. 2017, even lower. Today, as we speak, Cynthia, we only have 86 representatives in the House from a House of about 400 MPs, because we have 290 elected MPs, Then we have 94, 47 women rep and senators, about 94, comes to 384. Then you have some nominated, MPs and senators. That's almost a house of 400 members of parliament, and ODM has only about 85, 86. It's just 25%. It's a very small chunk of that particular house. It's going to even worsen as we head forward because of the changes of the dynamics of our politics. So Raila Odinga and William Ruto are politicians. They have a right to form their coalition pact, like I've said many times. And we will have somebody will come second in the opposition, so that Sankara can become the new leader of opposition, even legally that happens. And that will be a turning point in the history of our politics. So let Honorable Raila Odinga and William Ruto exercise their constitutional right to choose whoever they want to work with. I do not think they've offended anybody. These are politicians that are trying to survive. It's just that now we need to appeal for the rest of Kenyans like myself and others to plan our path into this ballot.
Right. If I got you correctly, Ngaira, because you seem to be a guy of numbers on set, right?
Absolutely.
So the Mount Kenya region is gone for President William Ruto.
Yeah.
The Eastern region is gone for President William Ruto and Raila Odinga.
Particularly for Raila Odinga, he loses a million votes in the mountain.
From the eastern bit, that is Kamba region.
That's 2 million.
2 million.
That's 2.5.
Yeah.
So 2.5 million gone.
2.5 plus a million from the mountain is 3.5. Half of what Raila Odinga got, actually.
Right.
Yeah.
Western region?
Give him 50 even as of today. Let's put it at 50. So 2.5, he loses about 1.5 million.
Right.
Cut it off. From 3.5, it comes to, I think, 5 million, isn't it?
Yeah.
If you take a million from Central, then take 2 million or 2.5 from the Kambani region, that's 3.5.
Yes.
Then if you take 1.5 from Western, it's 5 million votes,
yes, that's 5
which
million.
are completely gone.
Right.
So what does he remain within the table? We would have said the Nyanza region, isn't it? Then you have the Kisii factor and the fact that Matiang'i, who is going to be the Jubilee candidate for presidency within the coalition framework that they're trying to create in the remaining opposition. And you saw what they did to Raila Odinga at the stadium the other day. The Kisiis are clear. That's why Kisiis are now the second most successful native community in this country, business-wise, after Kikuyus. Because of the kind of brains and radical decisions they make. They are the most woke now in the country. They told Raila Odinga, we are done with you. We have another guy. I was in a certain meeting very quickly, Cynthia, and it was a debate between this Luo guy, supporter of Raila Odinga, and the Kisii guy. Both of them are from Nyanza. I've said for many years, the Nyanza region and the Western region, we are tied at the hip. Sometimes it's very hard to differentiate between George Oyuka Ngaira, who is from Kakamega, and George Oyugi, who is from Kisumu, and maybe Emmanuel Onkundi, who is from Kisii region, because of the long history of our lives. But it was funny to see the division, my brother Mwito, because this gentleman was saying, Raila Odinga went to Kisii and said that Matiang'i cannot win anything if he runs alone. So the guys there say the other day that we have no problem him running. Let him fall the way you normally fall. Raila Odinga falls on every day and he didn't die. So they have no problem with Matiang'i running and falling. After all, after he fall, others have fallen 6 times and they didn't die. So it wouldn't hurt Matiang'i falling this time, but they will fall with him. That means 600,000 votes from that South Nyanza region, Cynthia, are gone.
And possibly places like Migori and a bit of Siaya.
Where is Migori?
Migori itself, because it also has a population of the Luo community. And we also have
maybe some bit of Migori, because now Upper Migori is the one goes to
let's just call it Migori. That's why I want to call it a swing vote in terms of the support that is coming behind Raila Odinga. And this time is going to be a bit tricky, both in Siaya and Migori.
Right. If your numbers come to pass in 2027, we might have to just call you Prophet Ngaira.
Absolutely, because they're real numbers. Let me tell you.
Right.
And this is why I keep telling people that, you see, our brother Natembea, who comes from the Western region, comes from a region which has a combined vote of almost 5 million votes in this race. I'm saying on paper. On paper, what it comes from that region is 5 million. The mountain comes in another clean 5 million. If those two were to just do business together committedly, and remember, many people are saying Rigathi Gachagua does not have to be a candidate. Mountain has already had 3 presidents. He has no problem endorsing a third party. The moment you prop up a Western candidate that will have what you call a crossover appeal in Western, it's game over for this president, because they start with almost 12 million votes, isn't it? Because this is 7 million votes from 5 million native Kikuyu, but then you have the Meru, Embu, and things like that. It comes to 7 million. Then the Western 5 million. If they can offer something small to the Eastern Bloc, you know, Kalonzo and the group, and they deliver 3 million, that's 15. How much will William Ruto have to work to deliver to beat a 15 million native base? Because we've always said that Kenyan election is ethnic, isn't it? So when you do an ethnic census, Cynthia, you don't need to go to a class to be able to see that. There's already a 15 million lead before you take 2 million.
Sankara, in addition to what you'd like to say, let's speak about the Gen Z factor as well. How can the Gen Zs turn their numbers, their voices really to numbers on the ballot? Because clearly they have charted their own path. If you look at just the response of the latest decisions by government and the pact between Ruto and Raila, clearly against it. So how do they overturn those voices that they have and the online presence to numbers on the ballot come 2027? And how much of a factor are they as well?
Okay, thank you. But first, let me just mention a little on the numbers, because you know right now William Ruto doesn't need the numbers. The numbers will be needed in 2027. What he needed right now is political pacification of the masses, and that's now where Raila comes in. He doesn't bring in Raila to give him numbers right now.
Yes.
He feels that one he can sort it out later, but right now he wanted to deal with the politics first. So let's go to the Gen Z issue. You know, the Gen Zs are the most powerful political force in the republic right now. But the only problem is that the Gen Zs are not organized. Even as you look at the last year protests, they could have succeeded only if they could have organized themselves. Because you can't go to a war, even Mau Mau head generals and field marshals. Once you become leaderless and formless, you cannot transit to the next stage of taking power. And that's why even people like Raila asked the Gen Z, Ruto must go, then what next? Because Raila looked at the options. Because we were looking at a precipice. The nation was almost falling into a precipice because of the Gen Z protests. If they had succeeded, first they stormed parliament and deposed the house, then had they gone to State House and chased Ruto out of State House, what could have followed? Because the deputy president will also go due to the presidency being abolished by people storming State House. And then parliament, the speaker cannot take over for the 60 days because parliament has been breached. So the only option was handing it to the military. And that's why you see Raila saying that he saved Ruto from a military takeover. I think it was in that line. Because the options were only two. It's either we let the country go to the military or we pacify the country politically so that power remains in civilian hands. And even all these politicians knew that once it goes to the military, they will have no say in the running of this country. We will have another military junta in place, a military council that will govern the affairs of this country. People like Raila, people like Ruto, people like Uhuru Kenyatta, they will be wiped off from the political scene.
Right.
So that's why now they all ganged up and then joined together. And by joining Ruto, not that they were his friends, Raila is not friends with Ruto, it's only for convenience, because in politics, it's about interest. They looked at their interests, where are they being catered for better than the other side, and they chose Ruto.
Right.
So that they retain this power among civilians, so that they can continue jostling for it within themselves. If it had gone to the military, they will be out of it altogether. So the Gen Zs actually need to learn a lesson from the Sudanese revolution. Al-Bashir was not toppled by the military. It was a Gen Z revolution that toppled Al-Bashir. But what came next is the military that took over. And now look at how Sudan is right now. Because these military generals went there and then they failed to agree. Now they formed two factions which are still fighting each other to death. And even if you I was watching a documentary on Al Jazeera. Sudanese are saying life was better under al-Bashir than right now, because actually bad government is better than no government.
True.
And that's now where Raila Odinga cast his lot with Ruto and actually betrayed the Gen Zs, because the Gen Zs were not giving him a clear outline on how they are going to take power and even accommodating in it. So going forward, the Gen Z should actually know that taking power is a political process. It's not just something that you wake up and you find yourself there. And in Kenya, taking power is through elections. How are the Gen Zs organized this coming election? Because even these formations, the political parties, all want to have a piece of Gen Zs. You see ODM has taken some like Kasmuel Makoure, Morara was with Gachagua, but right now they have fallen out. You see people, William Ruto also has his share. So unless the Gen Zs come and form a unified voice, they will all be scattered and will be back to the same kind of politics of tribal arithmetics.
Right.
But if the Gen Zs can actually come up with issues which they did in June 2024,
yeah.
Yes, that's how they made their voice heard, and it even made the president not to sign that bill which has already been passed by parliament. It was pressure from the Gen Zs. But right now, what Ruto is trying to do is to return people to those politics whereby people were discussing tribes. That's why he put Gachagua out and brought Raila in, so that people can begin discussing tribes and forget about issues.
Right. But 5 minutes to wrap it up. I'd love to hear from you as well. If the Gen Zs don't reorganize and don't, sort of sit down, have a unifying voice, do they become a lost cause ahead of 2027 in just a minute?
Well, when I had a discussion with Gen Z somewhere, I said there's a possibility you can be branches of a very huge tree, but branches really don't grow when you plant them independently on the ground. They must depend on the one that holds the taproot and the other roots to fit that which you want to name. So we have to find a way of getting the Gen Zs into understanding and agreeing that they need some elderly to guide them, because they are dealing with politics that has been there for the last 66 years while they are 20. And for them to understand that to root it out, you must deal with it this way. Mwai Kibaki had been in government the longest time, even right from before the formation of the government, and while they started forming it, because he invited to form the government from Makerere, he knew too well that the routes the KANU government had taken, it's not going to be easy for you to just root out the KANU tree from power or from existence within that short time, no matter how much force you come out with. There are some things you'll have to look into. And who ended up becoming the president who took him out? It's Mwai Kibaki. Now, what I'm trying to say is that he told them it is difficult to cut a mugumo tree, is one of the very huge trees, cutting it with a razor blade. He didn't say it's impossible. He said it's difficult, which means you're going to have some very unnecessary task. But if you give it time and say you chip it out bit by bit, then that would be the way to go. Now, with the Gen Zs, the force that we have right now is a matter of ensuring, first they sit down, one, let them not be that amorphous group that does not have a leader, does not know where it's heading. And when you ask them, they were making references to some platform on social media, and they could be coordinated from there. And I remember asking them at some point, what's the age of the guy coordinating you? Then later on, we discovered these are guys who are beyond 30s and some in 40s. So those were not Gen Zs. But these are the kind of things. Now, the best way for the Gen Zs to consolidate their power is from their institutions of learning and such, and even in the village. And once they do it, even in the institutions of learning, they should remember that they are Gen Zs in college, and they need the ones in the village. So the way they should correlate to marshal to merge their force so that it can become meaningful they should also know that the politicians who are corrupt and who don't want change are actually privy to this kind of, of formations. And so they will work so hard, and that includes the likes of Raila Odinga. We would not like a young man to come up, but the president also is in the old politics. We are in the old politics. If we want to exist, then we'll have to deal with what is coming up if we don't love change.
Yes.
But those of us who have updated their software, we understand that when your time is up, your time is up. Then give space and give room for others. The only thing you can do is offer the kind of advice that they need to consolidate their strength. And that's why I said, it's your time as youth. Let the Gen Z terminology out and bring in that you're the youth and the energy of this country. Once they do that, and they realize that this is what is there for them, then at that point we will experience, meaningful change beyond expectation.
Right, thank you. Ngaira, this particular group, seems to be also a key factor on whoever gets to, win the race in 2027. That is, if they can be able to marshal their numbers and get their voter cards, actually. That should be step number one. But what kind of leader appeals to this particular kind of group in a minute?
Just very quickly, the population of Kenya this year, every year Kenya's population increases by about 1 million numbers of people that, countrywide, when you look in terms of births and the survival, the number of kids that survive after birth, is that the population increases by 1 million. So this year Kenya will turn 58 million. So we're likely to do 59 next year, and then 2027 we're likely to have a population of 60 million. Out of the 60 million Kenyans, chances are that 50-60% of them are going to be over 18. That means you're likely to have 30 million adults. But out of the 30 million adults, Cynthia, half of them are going to be what you're calling the youths and the millennials, between 18 and 40 years. So with 30 million voters, approximate potential voters at that particular time, we have 22.5 million in the portal now. IBC has said, I saw the CEO of IBC saying that they're targeting about 5.5 to maybe 6 million. So my take is that they're hoping to hit the 30 million mark if they achieve their target. 30 million voters, Cynthia, and with almost 20 million of them being what you're calling Gen Zs and millennials, can take out any president in record time. And there's no amount of rigging that can stop that. It's just what President Trump was saying, too big to rig, you understand? But there are things that you need to do. Somebody asked me the other day, Cynthia, that where have I been in the last 3 months? I told them I was in the kitchen. I was in the kitchen cooking. I was in the kitchen cooking. And I can tell you we have an answer to it. Because one thing I've told the young people is that there's no election that happens on Facebook or TikTok. Elections happens on the ballot. And if you want to make a difference, that difference has to be on the ballot. The one thing that set apart Linet Toto from the other agencies, because he was 24, is that when UDA announced that now we're going to have nominations, the young lady borrowed 400 shillings from his mom to go to the office, the constituency office, to pick the nomination later. And when aspirants were called to come and meet, the aspirants of UDA were called to go to the deputy president residence. He was their party leader then. Again, young Linet Toto borrowed 1,000 shillings from his dad and boarded from his father's kitchen. He said, Dad, I've cooked breakfast. The father said he didn't tell me what the money was for. He just said, Dad, I need some money. And so, because he was still a student, so the dad said, anyway, he gave him the 1,000 shillings. She boarded a matatu to Nairobi town, then boarded another matatu to Karen, to Ngong Road, just where the current Plains Road is, where we're going to deputy residence, and then walked from the junction there, where you have the many car bazaars, to the deputy president residency, to an extent that the GSU, when they saw this young lady walking towards the gate, they wondered, who's this? And they actually stopped her, you understand? And it is the stopping by KDF and being humiliated that made her trend, and took her, gave her the visibility that made her defeat Joyce Korir, the women rep, who was a sitting women rep, a multi-millionaire with VAs and all this, and kicked her in the nomination. What I'm saying is that Linet Toto and my brother Peter Salasia, because we went through the same story, he could not afford even the 250,000 shillings for the 250,000 shillings. Just 1 minute, just for the benefit of justice. Right. Salasia could not, we could not get the 250,000 shillings to pay for the nominations. So it was impossible for him to get the ODM ticket. And then we went and getting the DAP ticket. Then just when we were starting to celebrate that we're going to be on the ballot again, again we had a news press release from the Azimio group saying ODM has been zoned, Kakamega has been zoned for ODM. Again, we're not going to be on the ballot. It took a personal intervention because we met at junction and went to Kerapol to see Mzee with Eugene Wamalwa, to force Mzee and tell him this young man is popular in that constituency.
He'll get the seat.
He'll get the seat and ODM will lose. And ODM still didn't give up. What Mzee said, okay, he can run, but we'll still run a candidate.
Yeah.
So ODM still ran a candidate. You understand? And he defeated them. That persistence is what I am saying will make the difference.
Yeah.
That the young people then must understand there is no election on Facebook, on TikTok. It's on the ballot. And the day they call for the elections, either show up as a candidate or as a voter.
As a voter.
That will change the whole game. So we have something coming up in June, in July 5th. It's a national convention for reforms. It's a big plan because it has to do it has everything to do with the Gen Z.
Right.
A political solution for a political problem.
So this part is a political problem.
Registration for the ID card is key for the Gen Zs.
Right. They need
And
the
also,
votes.
Yeah, they also need to register with the IBC as soon as it's formed, because they ought to kickstart with the registration process, besides the delimitation exercise that they ought to have done, which is a bit time barred at the moment.
Yeah.
But registration of voters is something that the IEBC, after taking up the seat in the positions, they're supposed now to register. Go into the registration exercise.
Right.
Yeah.
Final word, Sankara.
Okay, just a quick one for the Gen Zs. We must actually know that it's either we hanging together or we'll be hung separately. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, gentlemen, for your time. In studio this morning on the farthest right is Victor Sankara, who's the chairperson of the Ford Kenya Kasarani branch. And I'll call you back for the Ford Kenya conversation and what's the way forward on that as well. Next to him is Ruto-Raila, who's a political analyst and commentator. Thank you very much. As well as George Ngaira, who's a governance analyst and a former ODM like member. So thank you very much for coming in this morning to have this conversation. We'll be keeping tabs with various issues across the country, and more conversations around this will be had right here in this studio. Thank you for watching. Have yourselves a fantastic Friday morning and a blessed weekend ahead as well.